Hi, my name is Alana Blair, and I recently wrote an essay on how movement in the classroom can be very beneficial to children. This is Taegan Scott.
Hi, yeah, my name is Taegan. I am studying psychology and dance at the University of Utah, so Alana thought I'd be a good person to come chat about this.
Indeed, indeed. So kind of as an introduction to this topic, usually in a classroom, like throughout K through 12, you have like a typical classroom setting is children are sitting at desks and they're either being instructed by a teacher or they're doing like stations, but most of their day is sedentary outside of like going to recess or other activities. But I think that there's better ways that we can incorporate things like movement into the classroom. Mostly because it helps with like the engagement of the students in their curriculum, and also retention of that information and facilitating a more positive classroom environment for both the teacher and the student, which is really interesting. Um, so, a word that I'm going to be using a lot is kinesthetic learning, which we have both talked about a lot through high school dance company.
Kinesthetic learning is a type of learning. It's based on this idea that a lot of people have individual learning needs, and kinesthetic learning is like learning through your body. So maybe a teacher could help students remember a topic by teaching them like gestures. So if you had to remember topics for a test, do like this is an apple and like do that for an apple or something just to get it in their body, and then that helps connect with the memory.
Something that we've seen used a lot through a dance internship with a lovely lady named Courtney Giles is brain dance videos. I recently made one with her that's called the Walk the Dinosaur brain dance video. So the song is from Ice Age. It talks all about dinosaurs and like how they functioned and how they moved. And the way that she choreographed it was each movement was a dinosaur. So you had like the pterodactyl movement, you had like the T-Rex movement, you had different movements like that for the kids help them remember, oh, this dinosaur kind of moves like this, you know? But those videos can also be used like in a typical classroom setting. Teachers can pull up the videos, let's say they do it in the morning, and play it for the kids and activate different parts of their brain, which sets them up for a very good learning day.
But it really just helps the kids like reset and get back into that mind space, because we do the best when you're not just focusing all of your energy on the same thing for a long period of time. You need those like breaks in your day, especially young children. So I think that like implementing this into all general education classrooms would be a really useful thing, because I remember that helping me even when I was little and probably didn't understand how it was helping me.
I think another thing that we've seen with that internship is the way that Courtney applies like grade level curriculum to her classes. We're working with our first graders on learning about the life cycle of a butterfly. So each class period, she would focus on a different section of that lifestyle, like how they start out in little eggs and then how they hatch and form into caterpillars and what the caterpillar moves like, and then what the caterpillar can look like and different things like that. And then after caterpillar, they go into their cocoons and they spend some time in there, and then they emerge as beautiful butterflies, and they have the butterfly migration, and then after they migrate, they're just living their best life as a butterfly. And it was really cool to watch in these kids, these little first graders, do this whole entire dance by themselves, pretty much, with just a little bit of like cue words from us. And, even talking about it, they could tell you exactly what each section meant. They could tell you, about hatching out of the egg into a caterpillar, and they could tell you what their caterpillar looked like in their head. They can tell you about how the butterflies migrate from different places.
Something that I just wanted to bring up from like a psychological standpoint is the concept of state dependent memory. And I think Alana will talk a little bit more about memory in this podcast. But something that's really interesting to me is that memory is all about context that you're surrounded in. So you're making memories based on everything that you're doing in the moment you're making that memory. So if you're doing a dance to that memory, that gives you more retrieval cues and it makes it actually easier to come to mind when you're thinking about it. So if you have something that is very specific, like this is a butterfly, you have one more, like that kinesthetic learning we were talking about earlier, you have one more cue to rely on out of, instead of just like declarative memory and specific facts, you have something else that you can draw on, which just the more retrieval cues that you have, the easier it makes retrieval to be.
Kind of along with you already were talking about memory, that semantic memory is like the facts and general knowledge of just like for example, if you're just trying to study and you're sitting with a notebook open and you're trying to just memorize all those facts into your brain. But with episodic encoding, that's more of things that you're like physically doing and like um memories of like instances in your life, which is like more movement based. So by giving them like prompts of like move this way, they're more likely to have an easier time retrieving that in their memory because of the episodic encoding that happens when they're moving and making those memories in space rather than just sitting with a notebook open being like, okay, I have to memorize what these 10 words mean. If you give them like the opportunity to move and put it into their bodies and make a memory in space, they're more likely to have an easier time retrieving that. And I think along with that, teachers will see higher test scores with that type of memory storage because they're going to have an easier time sitting and taking a test and being like, okay, I remember doing this. I can now remember what it means. Another thing that I think is really influential with bringing movement into the classroom is how it releases in the brain a lot of different chemicals like dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine and that stuff that makes you feel good inside and makes you happier. Like they're often referred to, I feel like, as the happy chemicals. And I think that is influential in making the classroom a more positive environment for both teachers and students. Because even if the teachers are just moving along with their students, that's going to release those same chemicals in their own brain, which allows for the whole entire class to just be like, okay, I'm ready to sit and do more learning or continue doing more things throughout the day.
Okay, going off of what Alana was talking about dopamine, dopamine also releases so dopamine is like the happy chemical, one of them. Serotonin is like more sustained over time, and dopamine is kind of these quicker like hits. And dopamine alerts the reward system in your brain, so it makes you feel like rewarded and like you're getting something out of it. So that is also really helpful in like the positive environment and allowing kids to like school, which is really important if you're gonna learn. You're gonna learn better if you're having a better time, and that's just the releasing the reward system in your brain.
Another thing that I've found really interesting in like observing these classes and watching Courtney teach most of the time is how different kids engage in the lessons, because I feel like there are always those kids, like if you're sitting in a lesson, that they're just off in their own world and they're not paying attention to anything that is going on. But it's cool to watch these classes and these young kids come in to these art emotion classes where they're moving their bodies but they're still learning, because the majority of the class, if not all of them, they are engaged in what we're doing and they're wanting to do that, and they're not like picking a fight about like sitting and doing math or whatever. Like they're more willing to do things, which I think is really, really cool. And another thing that I know I've seen and I've felt in myself, honestly, is how movement allows you to kind of like change your answers and develop things rather than like, this is the right answer, this is what you have to be doing. incorporating movement into a lesson allows them to kind of change their answers to things and formulate it for themselves and be like, okay, this is making sense in my brain. They're forming those connections between things, which I think is really, really cool to see, especially in like the younger children, because, you know, I don't think you see that a whole lot in a typical classroom setting. I don't know.
Yeah, I know during my internship, we had a few kids at the beginning of the year really like be resistant to learning, especially through dance. They're like, I don't do dance, especially a lot of the boys were very resistant and was like, I don't want to do that. I've never done this before. But by the end, like Courtney really told me, like, our goal is just to get those kids who didn't want to engage the most. And honestly, I saw that like progression so much in those kids that really didn't want to. I saw them really learn and like connect with this learning because I think they first of all made them happy, they really liked it, and it gave them a new way to do things, and they didn't ever have to, it wasn't ever set in stone. And like Alana was saying earlier, like it wasn't this sedentary learning and just sitting in a classroom listing off facts. And these kids really connected with the ability to do things on their own terms. So like a lot of the things we would do were like improv based. So we'd be like, okay, dance like you're a spider. And you can take that a lot of different ways. You can crawl on the ground, you can stay in the air and move your arms, you can just use your hand. And I think a lot of these kids really connected with this creativity part of it. And I really saw a lot of progress with these kids. And I think that implementing this in more classrooms would be really beneficial, especially just a little break. Sometimes that's all a kid needs. They don't need, we love these like PE classes and you need that hour of break, obviously. But I think we can also, sacrifice 2 3 minutes of our time because it will help the engagement in the classroom.
To sum everything up, I think movement in the classroom could be very, very, very beneficial to not only just elementary schoolers, but also bringing it into high schools and allowing those kids to take those classes and continue diving deeper into different topics, because it really, like, even getting into information about the brain and what dance does to like release different chemicals and these connections that you're making to physical memories through movement can be very, very beneficial in like anybody's learning. um and it will help create a better classroom environment because you're allowing these kids to take a break and just move their bodies and get their bodies moving. And you'll, as a teacher, I think you could find that these kids would be just happier and more pleasant to be around throughout the day. Obviously, that's not like guaranteed every single child, but you're going to see improvement in a lot of these children. And test scores will go up if they're used with curriculum, like alongside it, because they're making those episodic memories. They're going to retain that information better. And they're overall, I think, going to be more engaged throughout the day, and especially in movement-based lessons, because they're allowed to move their bodies and decide for themselves what that looks like. They're given a prompt and they're like, okay, this is what this means for me. So my biggest thing is I would love to see this incorporated more into like even elementary school classrooms, or bring the VTS arts program into more elementary schools in St. George, and keeping dance programs alive in high schools and allowing high school kids to create, because in my experience, beautiful things have come out of that. And that's where you see a ton of growth and learning in a lot of kids, is allowing them to create and change things and form their own ideas and opinions on things. So thanks for coming to my podcast, and thank you, Taegan, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.